Oh, well, look how cute you were back then. I bet you were a handful.
I will throw you out an airlock if you do not shut up.
Welcome back to Worlds Collide. Please comment, like, and subscribe. Chapter 15, New Arrival. To my relief, the remainder of the trip unfolded without another episode. On a positive note, a redesign commenced for the officer quarters throughout the ship. No longer were the rooms the size of glorified closets. Shay and I still occupied the converted storage room for my benefit, despite the changes made to accommodate my irrational fear. Mushri Mershi reclaimed the captain's quarters, which kept him near the bridge. All in all, I considered it beneficial for everyone involved. We eased back into the maintenance dock at Torino's shipyard a week later. Mushri Mershi remained unavailable throughout. His assistant mentioned something about overloading engines and needing to oversee their overhaul. We were assured he would visit us after we docked. There were no fancy observation platforms from which to view the station with the naked eye. Instead, we had a wide viewport on the forward section of the bridge. The only problem I noticed was the blast doors were jammed half open, unable to even close from their frozen position. The assistant muttered apologies between creative curses as he yelled at the gathered officers around him. Shay frowned at the theatrics while I suppressed a barely restrained laugh. I was still wiping tears from my eyes when we exited the ship. The dock resembled any of the others. Same size, same color, same equipment. The only real difference was the obvious age of the surroundings. Everything bore a well-maintained appearance, but with the scratches and discolorations that came with age, we were greeted by nobody. No delegation or guide awaited us. "Are we early?" I asked, bewildered. Mashri Mershi seized that moment to stroll past us. "Come on, kid!" He motioned for us to follow with a hand over his shoulder as he passed. "Let's get you settled in some food." Shay and I hoisted our bags. I carried one extra this time rather than allowing her to bear the excess weight. She had started to protest, but I walked off with her bag, ignoring her. The door to our room rolled aside with a loud whine of hydraulics and the grinding of pockmarked titanium. I cringed, and I swore I could feel the sound reverberating throughout my body, to the point my teeth ached. Shay and her uncle fared no better. Each pressed their ears flat against their skulls in an effort to drown out the sound. "Sorry about that," shouted Mashri Mershe when the door mercifully stopped moving. "This room hasn't been used since you were a child. I'll have Trask get someone on it." Despite the neglected door, the room was clean and spacious. It was obvious it had been attended to in anticipation of our arrival. Unlike the sterile environment of previous estate rooms we had used, images hung on the walls of what was possibly the station in its early days. There was even one of a much younger Shay with her father and what looked to be her uncle. Trask and Mercy were dressed modestly in coveralls with their arms draped over each other's shoulders. Shay stood before them, covered in what looked to be grease staining her snow-white fur. "Aw," I teased. "Look at you. You were so cute." "I'll toss you out an airlock," she snapped. "Not that you're not cute now," I said with a full, toothy grin. She shot me a stern glance that made me laugh out loud. She growled audibly. "Don't threaten me with a good time," I retaliated. Mashri Mershi stepped beside me, gazing at the picture himself. "That was right after we launched our first ship," he said whimsically. "Was that here?" I asked. "During a better time. This was our first station," he said. "Do you mind if I ask you a personal question?" I nodded. "How did you meet Shay?" I blinked in surprise. I guessed it was not an unexpected question. We were quite the odd pair. "I freed her from my people. We grew close after I was shot." His expression turned thoughtful. "The kit yours?" "Yes," I said proudly. I didn't bother to ask how he knew. Her pregnancy became more obvious by the week. She no longer possessed her defined features. She moved slower, more deliberate now. The doctors were unsure how long the pregnancy would last. Krathan gestation generally lasted 6 months, whereas humans were closer to 9 months. Shrifa claimed it could be somewhere between the two, but because of the parentage, there was no way to know for sure. Her uncle absorbed the information without comment. "I am not my brother," he stated finally. "I am only concerned with her safety and happiness. You threaten either, and I will put you out of an airlock and claim it was a system malfunction." Shay emerged from the bedroom at that moment. Mercy placed a clawed hand on my shoulder and squeezed hard enough to make me flinch in pain as his claws pierced the skin beneath my shirt. "I'm starving," he announced suddenly with a genuine smile. The suite featured a quaint dining room big enough for the four of us. There was no fancy kitchen, no private cook. Dinner arrived from the station dining facility atop a makeshift tool cart. For the first time since our rescue, I felt completely at ease. Mercy and Shay both laughed easily and loudly as they reminisced about the early days before her military career. Shay was well on her way to becoming a bright ship engineer before she left for the military, Mercy commented. She was small enough to fit into the narrow passageways between the walls. "That was Trask's plan for me," she said, refusing to refer to him as father. "I wanted to see the galaxy like you did." "So you did. You were always stubborn," he glanced at me, "and found yourself a mate in the process?" I must admit, I am curious about that story. Shay and I spun the narrative about how we met, our harrowing escape, and how we eventually became a pair. Mercy listened with rapt attention around mouthfuls of food. Once we were caught up to the current situation, Shay delved into our plan to expand production in the incorporation of humans into Krathan society. Conversation diverged into talk about the current state of the shipyard. When newer and more profitable mining sites began coming online, much of the resources shifted away from Torinos. Prominent engineers were reassigned, and more lucrative commissions were given to others. Mercy had stayed on to fill the void left by all the vacant positions, which suited him since he no longer fit in with the societal mold. He had been a flight commander for a small flight wing when the war started. It was there that he had lost an eye trying to land his damaged fighter onto the carrier. Recovery had taken the better part of a year, and he was discharged with a full pension. It was then that he had partnered with Trask to build new, innovative fighter designs based on his experience. "I want to shift ship construction to science, freight, and mining," said Shay finally. "Torinos has been released from military obligation. What ships do we have available?" Mercy scratched behind his ear in contemplation. "There's the ship we flew in on, of course. We have 2 survey shuttles and 3 hyper-capable transport ships. I'm afraid there's not much left," he said apologetically. "How far is the cruiser from completion?" He shrugged. "It's anyone's guess. There are spirits loose in that ship." "Then we are going to have to excise them," she said seriously. "We will need it soon." "How soon?" he asked. "You have until after the child is born," she said. "I have read the reports on Fekete, and they are dismal. By my estimate, we have 2, 3 at most, before the mines are exhausted. The station will grind to a halt within a year following without those resources." "What if Sewell's system lacks the resources?" he asked bluntly. She let out a heavy sigh. "Then we will have to look elsewhere. We both know these military ships are resource-intensive." The evening concluded on that note. There would be plenty of time to organize resources, train personnel, and prepare contingency plans. We would be spending the remaining time on Torinos until the child was born. Days initially crawled by with agonizingly boring routine. Meetings filled the early mornings, followed by tours of different departments. By the time evening rolled around, we were so exhausted that we only wanted to sleep. The reports were never good. Rapidly diminishing resources from the planet dominated the briefs. Progress to rid the cruiser of its ghosts proved maddeningly difficult. When one system was fixed, another would sneak in like a magician entering a sealed room. On one particular occasion, I was asked to monitor digital readings on a panel while one of the engineers attempted to replace a faulty relay. Everything was going as planned until he attempted to plug in the new one. Sparks flew from the panel I had been monitoring. I managed to duck a fraction of a second before it exploded outward. The force of it embedded shrapnel in the wall across the door. I stood watching the still vibrating metal when the engineer came running over to check on me, only to stop short, his claws screeching against the deck plating as he tried to stop suddenly. I apparently failed to escape unscathed as I first thought. A smaller sliver protruded about 4 inches from my left shoulder, a hole marking the path of least resistance through my flesh. Blood began to soak my once pristine white shirt, leaving a matching crimson stain from the trip through my skin. Another incident occurred on the drone launch bay a week later. The pressure seal failed on the bay doors while running system diagnostics in the area. The oxygen was instantly purged from the room when the failed seal resulted in an explosive decompression. One engineer was ejected through the gaping hole left behind. Had it not been for the environmental suit many began wearing, we would have been spending 6 hours retrieving a corpse rather than a rather severely rattled tech. The other engineer was treated for a broken arm after being sandwiched between two heavy plastic crates. Shay convened a meeting 2 days later with Mersch and the other senior engineers in our secure quarters. These accidents can't be random, Shay began without preamble. There has to be a saboteur somewhere on the ship. Karst blinked in surprise twice, as if he had been slapped without warning. How is that possible, Miktar? The newest member in the team has been here for at least 3 rotations, along with about 38 other personnel. The others have been here since the beginning. She locked eyes with Mersch. I want everyone with access to the areas where accidents have occurred investigated. Look for overlapping patterns of access. Yes, Miktar Shaisi, he acknowledged formally. I will look into it personally. The meeting ended in silence from the leads. I was forbidden to assist with any repair from that day on. The excessive caution left me feeling frustrated. I had been offering to help with minor tasks as a means to stave off the oppressive boredom. I approached Frey the following day, wanting to resume hand-to-hand combat training. I stopped attending most of the meetings since I had little input to offer. Instead, I buried my head in ship manuals during the day as I waited for Frey to become available. With only herself, Gracia, and 2 additional security who had accompanied us, she was stretched thin. Each of the security was assigned to one of us at all times. That left only Frey and Gracia to see to the logistics. Her team was supplemented with a handful of station security, but she didn't trust anyone whom she had not picked herself. The nights consisted of me being tossed across a cargo bay, after it was fully checked, of course. There were no mats to soften the blows, so I often returned to my quarters with new bruises in different stages of healing. Most didn't last more than a day or 2. She had once told me pain was the greatest teacher. Her words turned out to hold more meaning than I had realized at the time. After 4 days of bouncing off bulkheads and deck plating, I began to calculate my moves more fiercely. I began to make fewer mistakes and even managed to turn the tables on Frey on a few occasions. They were small wins, each short-lived because she would change her technique and even added additional techniques. A month passed before there was a breakthrough in the investigation. Mershi called Shay and me into his own quarters. The invitation didn't come through normal electronic communication. Shay interrupted one of the training sessions and motioned for Frey and me to follow. She said nothing, gave nothing away as we followed her toward the command deck, where Mershi's modified but still cramped room resided next to the bridge. His door slid open before we could announce our arrival. The 4 of us managed to squeeze into the minimal confines, almost standing on top of each other. Everyone pointedly watched me once the door closed. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and nodded. Mershi leaned across the door near the toilet with his arms crossed, a grave expression etched like stone on his face. I found the saboteur, he said flatly. He has been dealt with. The last was spoken with such finality that there was little doubt about his meaning. Did you find out why? Frey asked as if inquiring about the weather. There was a slight dip to his ears before they rose again. There is a faction that doesn't want you to succeed. Your bond has upset people in positions of power. He let the revelation sink in before continuing. Before you ask, kid, no, my brother doesn't appear to be involved. At least not directly or intentionally, he conceded. There are political powers at play here. Names? Demanded Shay casually. Mershi shook his head. None before I released him from service. Where there is one, there may be more, he warned. If there are, they will be aware of our surveillance and will likely change their tactics. Is Shay in danger? I asked angrily. Mershi shook his head. I doubt it. Trask is very powerful and has a long reach. While he and Shay are at odds, he would likely dismantle the entire government to find out who was involved. You and the 2 manufacturing facilities are another matter. Then we need to accelerate our timeline, remarked Shay. Mersh's expression became concerned. You could deliver any day, kid. It is not possible. I grew up on ships and stations since I was an infant, she countered stubbornly. Our cub can do the same. I advise against it, Frey said seriously. Noted, Shay said sharply in a way that meant the conversation was over. Prepare the necessary ships. We leave for Mashar in the morning. We need to brief Maso Shro. If I deliver between now and the time we arrive, then we can revisit this discussion. Our belongings were relocated back aboard the cruiser the following morning, with the exception of the pistol Latra had given me. I dressed in Krathen military attire and now carried it within the concealed pocket. Nobody noticed, but Frey shook the duffel experimentally when she grabbed it to carry and then gave me an approving look. 3 ships flanked us as we undocked, 1 transport and a survey ship. The third appeared to be a much smaller vessel of slender design. There was nothing remarkable about it except the 2 turrets that flanked its hull. I mentioned the mysterious ship, but was assured it was simply a scout fighter that would travel 10 minutes ahead of the small fleet. The official brief put out was that we were performing another test flight. The additional ships were to accompany us in the event of catastrophic failure. We stood on the bridge and viewed the transition of stars from twinkling lights to colorful lines, engulfing the ship as it transitioned to hyperspace. Shay either rested in the medical bay or stood watch on the bridge during our voyage. She was never allowed to be alone during the final stage of her pregnancy. The trip was uneventful for most of the voyage. There were no malfunctions this time. Everything functioned well within tolerable limits. The ship simply hummed pleasantly, like it was enjoying a leisurely stroll through the vacuum of space. It was not until the day we were expected to arrive at Mashar Station unannounced that an alarm sounded. Medical was summoned to the bridge. The voice over the intercom was not Shay's. It was one of the bridge crew in a near panic. Frey and I were training in one of the cargo bays when it happened. She stopped midway through one of her command and control positions when she aborted it, and we both bolted out of the bay toward the medical department. There was little doubt about the medical emergency. Shay had been restless for the past 2 days. She was unable to get comfortable despite anything she tried. The morning started out with her pacing back and forth until she declared she was going to go to the bridge. That had been less than 2 hours ago. We arrived before the medical team returned. Medical staff were already preparing a bed for her. One tried to eject us from the area, but reconsidered her life choices after Frey flashed her teeth menacingly. The tech raised her hands and backed away carefully before returning to the important task at hand. We didn't have to wait long before Shay arrived, lying curled on her side atop a gurney. I was not able to get near her for all the medical personnel, but I hovered nearby close to the head of the bed and waited for the opportunity to join her. Shay panted heavily between contractions, her claws digging into the fabric of the bed each time the pain struck. A sharp roar escaped her during one particularly excruciating spasm. I was instantly beside her within a single stride. Without thinking, I grabbed her hand and hissed sharply as her free hand found my arm and her claws sank deep within my skin. One of the medical staff attempted to rescue me from my foolishness, but I growled at her, showing my teeth in a threatening posture. My face contorted in agony with each contraction as the claws sank deeper into my bare forearm. I breathed a sigh of relief after a final push resulted in a soft mewl that grew louder and more distressed with each passing minute. I watched the medical staff tend to our child with a mix of curiosity and trepidation. What if it was misshapen? What if it was ill? We didn't have to wait very long before we were presented with a bundle of dark red fur, almost the color of dried blood. The tech laid her gently against Shay's bare chest. The kit nuzzled blindly in search of food until she latched onto one of the offered ample breasts. Shay seized the opportunity to release my arm to cradle our child protectively and began to purr loudly. I released the breath I didn't know I was holding and grabbed my arm to stop the profuse bleeding. Without her grip, the blood that had been compressed from the arm rushed back into the vessels, a torrent akin to a dam breaking. It was Frey who noticed it before anyone else, including me. She quickly grabbed a dressing and applied enough pressure to break me out of my trance long enough to look down. Pain erupted again as my mind registered the damage. I let out a sharp gasp and held my breath reflexively until my body overrode my reaction, and I inhaled with a hiss. A medical doctor rushed over to examine the damage. "Stupid human," she mumbled at the sight of the 5 deep puncture wounds that seeped blood profusely. "You lacerated a major vessel." Luckily, she didn't puncture an artery. I was able to rejoin my family an hour later. My arm was wrapped and stitched closed to protect the punctures long enough for the nanobots to heal the damage. I lowered myself into the offered chair and carefully reached out to run my fingers through the infant's dark fur. Shay looked up at me with tired eyes and smiled. "What should we name her?" she asked softly. Our custom dictates the father chooses the name. I considered it at length. Kiari Shai, I ventured. I didn't know where the idea for the first name came from, but it rolled off my tongue. Shay eyed me questioningly. You don't wish her to carry your surname? I scowled in confusion briefly before realization dawned. Kiari Shai would be her first and middle name. Most humans have 3 names. The middle is in honor of her mother. Strange, she muttered but smiled. But I like it. Kiari Shai Mitchell. She tested the flow of words against her own tongue as if tasting a new dish. We both slept soon after. Shay rested on her side, cradling our daughter protectively. My head lay next to hers and a single hand rested against Kiari. I drifted in and out of sleep throughout the night. I checked on our daughter each time. I was paranoid about her health and safety. I still couldn't believe our child was viable, despite her sleeping inches from me. I woke for the final time to find Shay resting on her other side, nursing our daughter. The doctor approached when she noticed us both awake. Your cub is strong and healthy. With the exception of a slightly shorter than average tail, she thrives. She glanced at her tablet. We will transport you to your rooms on Mashar Station soon. I perked up. I forgot we were almost there. How long have we been docked? Hours. Your security head has gone ahead to see to your accommodations. She should return soon. She turned to leave but stopped when I thanked her. She smiled. You are most welcome. True to the doctor's word, Frey returned a short time later, pushing what appeared to be a hover chair. I have made your rooms ready. I stood to help Shay to sit up. Once sitting, she looked up at me. Would you like to hold your daughter? I hesitated but carefully reached out to take her. Her fur was the texture of silk against my skin. I peered down at her small figure and scratched playfully behind her short, pointed ears that swiveled around, taking in every sound. She is beautiful, I whispered in awe. Is it normal for her eyes to not be open? They will not open for another couple months, Shay responded as she took her seat in the chair.
You know you love the story so far. Like and subscribe.